going to spoil it because to keep the suspension of disbelief here, but it's actually beautiful here in Southern California this week. It's beautiful, 72 degrees, sunny.
Hello and welcome to episode 202, the Rockstar CMO FA Marketing Podcast. It's Saturday the 27th of January. Hope you've had a good week. January is almost done. Hope you're well and staying as sane as you feel you need to be. I'm your host, Ian Truscott. I'm not a rock star, but I'm a three-time CMO and trusted marketing advisor. And with the help of my guests and chums, share the marketing street knowledge that I hope will inspire your inner rock star. Come say hello. You can find links to me and my guests in the show notes at rockstarcmo.com or on LinkedIn at Rockstar CMO. And we are proud members of the Marketing Podcast Network. This week in the marketing studio, Jeff Clark and I will be discussing a really interesting report from 6th Sense about B2B buyers. And I then get transported away in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar, the Robert Rose, for a cocktail and a thought about managing our own media platforms. But first, we need to play the bar tab. I'll be back in a moment.
We'll be right back.
We'll be right back.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Heiler hosts a fantastic podcast called Own It. Christy, tell us more about the show.
Own It is all about celebrating women and non-binary advertising agency owners. We talk about buying out of the boys' club of advertising because less than 1% of ad agencies are owned by women.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find the podcast at untilyouownit.com. We're also on the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe.
Right, it's time for a session with Jeff Clark, our resident strategy advisor, former Forrester research director in the Rockstar CMO marketing studio.
Good afternoon, Ian. Come on into the studio. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. You're very polite this week. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yes, I'm feeling like I need to be polite. I don't know. It's not like I haven't been polite. I don't know. It's a good question. I've been spending a lot of time on the phone with politicians and ministers and people that you need to be polite to. So maybe that's where it's coming from.
And let's get the first order of business out of the way. Snow up there in Massachusetts?
It has been snowing, and then yesterday when I had to make a trip to Boston, which for listeners is supposed to be a 2-hour ride from us, it started snowing and then raining and then kind of snowing, raining, which is just like the worst. So all of a sudden I was like a 3.5-hour trip or whatever it turned out to be. Yeah, it was about that. It was about that. And anyway, so the snow is not gone yet, but it's warming up. So
nice.
We shall see.
Very nice. Very nice. We have our regular sort of weather. Grey, kind of not raining, but not really bright. That kind of day. Sort of put in your mind what you think British weather's like. It's been like that today. I
remember that. I remember that in July.
Absolutely, yeah.
1 year.
It's surprisingly mild. So we've gone from being in the very low, well, the minus is centigrade. I don't know. I guess 20s, late 20s Fahrenheit. I don't know. Up to now being like 12 degrees centigrade, which 60, 50, 60. I don't know. I can't do that.
No, that's about there. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's,
wow.
Anyway, let's get on with business today because we've got a lot to cover.
We have got a lot to cover. It's interesting stuff.
Yeah. And if anybody follows me on LinkedIn, you can find me at Ian Truscott on LinkedIn. You might have seen that I referred to what it is that we're going to talk about, and I had a nice response from the folks we're going to cover today. So this week, you and I have been digging into the 2023 B2B buying experience report research from 6th Sense, guided by Kerry Cunningham, your former colleague and definitely a friend of, I'd say definitely friend of the show. He's been on the show.
He's been on the show. I think podcasts I listen to, they call that a friend of the show.
Yes. And they had a 33 question survey, I've got to get this right, with over 900 B2B buyers across many industries to find out what's going on in the B2B buying trends. I really like this report. They found some great insights, which affect how we do marketing and selling. And we've picked out some things that we like. Not 5 effing things, sadly, because we've only got a limited amount of time.
But not everybody conforms to our editorial guidelines.
I know, it's outrageous, isn't it? So, but we've got a couple of... Well, we set a rod for our own back, right? So when the two of us are looking at a thing, it needs to be an even number, doesn't it? We need 6 effing.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But we've got a couple each here, and depending on how much time we have, we'll see if we can cover them all. So what say you, Jeff? What did you think of the report?
Well, I like the report a lot, and it builds on, so when both Carrie and I were at Serious Decisions, we did a lot of work on buyer studies and interviewing, and so they've picked up on, it's different than some of the work that we used to do, but they picked up a lot of the same concepts and conclusions, and really took it to the next level, to be kind of cliche. But I think one of the things is that it's like kind of, you can only, because they've got enough data, the number of people that they interview, the number of companies they interviewed, is that you can kind of build your own report. So if you whatever industry, maybe region, et cetera, you can drill down into that level of detail. So I think it's really great. So we're going to hats off to them. We're
going to say a lot of nice things about this piece of content, and I think we should point out that this is completely independent. We're not affiliated to Sixth Sense.
They're not paying us for this.
Exactly. We're not affiliated, and Kerry's been on the show, but we're not affiliated to Sixth Sense in any way. It's just really good content marketing, and that was really my first observation I was going to make about how the report is presented. It's not an ebook download. It's kind of like a digital experience, I guess you could call it. Tricky to describe what it is on an audio podcast, but if you look at it, you can sort of flip around places. You can go, and like you say, you can create your own reports based on the data, which kind of reminds me of Forrester in a way. In that if you did a wave with Forrester, you'd get the data and then you could create your own version.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
But the most amazing thing about it, really, in this day and age, is it's completely ungated. And so I spent hours down this particular rabbit hole. And the other thing is, in the interaction I had with Kerry on LinkedIn, he mentions about that ungated thing. It's a big deal for them, and they've got some research coming up on that as well. So what do you think?
Well, I think as you said, it's interesting. Not being a download, it's not a linear, sort of table of contents where you go, here's our first conclusion, and now we're and so it in some ways it took a while to figure out, because it kind of, if you just kind of scroll down the page, sometimes you see things repeated, and then you don't realize, I can actually drill in, go down the rabbit holes. So all told, I know one thing that the web analytics guys are going to love is it's going to create a long time on paid.
For sure. Yeah.
It's just like,
because it is a rabbit hole.
Oh my God. Really? Look at this guy from the UK who just spent 2 hours in this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that, listener, you're probably on a walk, having a run in your car or something like that, so probably can't follow along. But if you are looking for the report, and I'll include a link to it in the show notes, it's actually sixthsense.com/report/buyer-experience. But I presume there'll be a link to it on their homepage or something like that. You'll probably find it. Yeah. Anyway, so let's get on to the findings of the report. So get my words right. Prepare to fail, then fail. That was what we prepared for. So on to the research. What's the first thing that stood out for you, Jeff?
The first thing that stood out to me is that, buyers initiate the first contact with a vendor 83% of the time. So, and I think, one of the quotes I pulled from the report is, they consider an average of 4 suppliers, but they have largely made up their decisions about, by the time they get in touch with you, they've kind of figured out, what requirements are. I said 78% of the buyers have established requirements before making first content. In some ways, that's actually just, good buying process behavior. And so I think that's I mean, the thing is that we've always kind of known that people do a lot of the research and work before you run into them. I think the thing is that it's like they're reaching out to you. You're not finding them.
Yes.
And they've already made up, a good bit of their mind. Obviously, they haven't bought anything yet. So, what this means for us marketers is, we need to be planting seeds for buyers, and the way they should be making their decisions way ahead of that first contact. So, thought leadership content, education, articulating buyer needs and solutions, because that's what, they're typically out looking for, is like, who else has this problem? How do they solve it? Blah, blah, blah. And so, education, marketing becomes more important. And doing it ahead of getting into your typical funnel.
I like, and the point you made there is really good, is that it's behavior we would encourage, right, as consultants and advisors, is this idea that they've established their requirements before making first contact, which is amazing, because, so many times when people are trying to, their requirements change as they look at the demo. Going to market, knowing what your requirements are, is a really good thing for a buyer to do. But that idea of initiating first contact 83% of the time is the thing I wanted to pick up on, because it suggests to me, from our perspective, I mean, we've always drawn, we should actually chat about the funnel and what your views are of the funnel. I'd be interested in that. But we've always drawn this sort of funnel, like a funnel shape, like a kitchen funnel. But really, it's a big bucket of prospect or people that could potentially buy your stuff at some point. And then there's this little pipe at the bottom, isn't there, which is actually your pipeline, which is, it's a completely different mental model, isn't it? And the other, so the other thing that sort of came to mind when I was looking at this is that LinkedIn survey that I think we've referred to, a lot of people refer to. It's from Ernberg Bass, and it's a LinkedIn survey, which I'll also include a link to in the show notes, that a lot of people are referring to about right now, is that 95% of your prospective buyers are not in market, which means that big bucket at the top is, has got the 100% in, if you like. 5% of them are in market. 83% of that 5% are doing all the research for themselves, and then they'll drop out, which is why I think that sort of funnel shape has changed, right? And I think that seems to be, that changes the way you think, doesn't it, as a marketer?
Well, it is. And, it's funny because as you were talking about this, and, we didn't discuss this beforehand, but it changes the visual from, like you said, the typical kitchen funnel, or what you use to pour motor oil into your car, to you've got a sink. Yeah. And your sink is the total addressable market, or your serviceable market. Yeah. And then there's a little drain at the bottom. And there's a little filter. And the people that are getting into buying mode are what's going down that drain, and it's going quick. Once they decide they're going to go down. Once they get going, they're going quick.
Absolutely. I wrote a blog post about this once before, that I think it's a big bucket, and then there's a water slide at the bottom, because I think once that if you have got this buyer who's down to 4 suppliers, they've got a clear favorite already, they've got all the requirements sorted out, that, and we're going to talk about time in a moment. That's quite a quick slide down that path, isn't it? So what's your second observation?
The second one is that if a vendor hasn't won the buyer over during the first 2/3 of the buying process, so which we've talked about, they have a 16% chance of winning the deal. Yeah. So that means your odds are not they're not very good. And if 84% of the time the first vendor contacted wins the business, that's another sort of sub point on here. That just means your odds are
really poor.
Are really poor, unless you've influenced that front end, before they've contacted you, or you've somehow contacted them. That just that puts you on the back foot. So one of the things I think this means is critical for marketers is this whole concept of understanding who your target account, the total addressable market down to. Do you have a target account subset of that, and can you start identifying buying group members? So people who are in the accounts, whether it's information you've purchased, whether it's historical information, whether it's you're doing using intent tools to find people who are sort of in the market, and you can start to assign them to this person's the champion, this person's an influencer. So building that thing out that buying group, which is certainly one of the things that our friend Kerry Cunningham has been talking about for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now, is incredibly important for marketing to do.
Yeah.
Because nobody else is going to do that work.
No.
Because we have the tools to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things I was thinking about as well. And I also think that when we talk about being relevant as marketers and doing personalization and stuff, it's only when somebody hits that little pipe that we just identified at the bottom. If you don't identify your ICP and the 100% of your group at the top and start marketing to them at the beginning and doing that education, then by the time you're aware of them and you see them, there's no point in being personalized and relevant then. They've already made up their minds, right? They've already figured out who you are and they're coming to you, right? So, and I also think that if you combine that with the last 2 points, it sort of suggests that our marketing budgets are a bit skewed as we tend to lean towards lead nurture or demand generation, that bit of known, if you like, of the funnel. And it's all very measurable. You know, we know our click-through rates and our open rates and all that stuff, versus where we probably need to focus, which is in the sync or the big bit at the top, which is much harder to measure, isn't it? That's brand and content marketing, category definition work that we have to put up there. And I thought that for me, I mean, I think we both, I mean, it's not new news, is it? It's a very good report, but it's not new news. And I think we've been thinking about the importance of brand for a while. But there was also another related point in the report that 78% of B2B buyers have completely or largely established their requirements for making contact, which I think you referred to just a moment ago as well. And so that and those requirements don't change in the home stretch of the buying. So when you do that education in the big bucket, you need to be telling them what they want to look for before they come anywhere near you, right? Outside the bucket. So the vendor has very little influence over shifting requirements once they've been in touch. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it's almost as though they need to be ready to respond to if this is the typical set of requirements we would expect from buyers coming in. We need to be able to know how to respond to that in detail, and I'll touch on that again a little bit a little later.
Well, what I also thought in all of this report, now I might have missed something, and maybe you haven't, but you and I have been around for a while, and people know that, but. But the old school, you know what I mean? Like, there's a long list of vendors, there's a request for information, there's a request for proposal, and generally you sort of get down to these 4 suppliers for that final bake-off. What I was catching from this is that final bake-off is happening before
early.
You know, and then you're in that very end of that process. There's no influencing what the RFP looks like or the RFI or any of that education going on. It's already happened, hasn't it?
Yeah. It's probably except for government agencies, you know, we're still going through that long process. It's quite condensed.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's your third point? We're on to number 3, aren't we?
I think we're on to number 3. Yeah. So one thing, and maybe this is not, you know, I don't know. It could be depending on your own experience in being part of a buying team, but this larger buying teams report shorter, not longer buying cycles. So, you know, you may think, oh, you know, big organization, I'm selling to, I don't know, you know, I'm selling to Microsoft or something like that. They're going to take forever because they're going to have all these people involved, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, what appears to be happening is that they have more mature buying and purchasing processes internally, and they have personnel who are dedicated to figuring out how to run the process and time to evaluate solutions. So, and again, they've done a lot of that homework up front, creating requirements, blah, 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 you know. And so, you know, what this means is that, to me, what this means for marketers is that, you know, you're going to have a very quick selling process, and you're going to have a lot of people potentially involved in that process. And so you've got to be able to arm and help sales with developing kind of the educational tools and other things that kind of help that process from when they first contact you to the end to go smoothly, quickly, and obviously working as much as possible in your favor. So, but one of the things that in the report they talked about making sure you have one-to-one subject matter experts and consultants, have practitioner communities. Those are not necessarily new things. Your events, educational events. That's where user conferences and other you're going on speaking tours and trying to bring people up to speed on what's going on in the market. Those things become, really important because that's helping people. It's helping your company be active and viewed favorably in that very short last part of the buying cycle.
Yeah, but also with that education stuff, what I was also seeing in that is that you have to do all the education in that big blind block at the top, right? Because it's like I don't know how to structure this feedback without talking about who I'm talking about, but basically, I kind of had a conversation with
Company ABC.
Yeah, no, I had a conversation with a vendor, and then I started looking at their nurture programs and signed up to some stuff. And what I was getting was basic educational content, right? Now, what this report suggests to me, that me initiating that content, I've already done the education. There's no point in telling me these are the fundamentals of the category. I already know the fundamentals of the category. What I need to now do is to figure out how I'm going to differentiate you from the other three that I'm thinking about, right? So I think that what's interesting about that last point you were making about education, that kind of stuff, you've got to pitch that absolutely spot on right? Because if you go too basic when somebody's in that little tiny spout coming out the bottom, they already know that stuff, right? That's why they come to you. But how do you give away education for free in the big bucket without being penalized and trying to justify that to the boss, right? Because
I mean, I think this is where your sort of intent monitoring tools become really important, because you're as we were talking about it. It's great that this study was kind of given away free. You don't have to fill a form in. Well, that's what everybody's doing. And so how do you, whether it's from your site or whether it's from a third party site, how do you track that people are actually picking this up, and who's picking it up, and can I tie it to an account, and can I start getting early indicators that this count is they're bubbling in the sink.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're trying to make their way out.
Oh, absolutely. The dark funnel, I think, dark funnel, I think is what it's called.
Yeah, I don't want to go to the dark web.
But it's dark funnel, isn't it? But sorry, you completely threw me there. But I think also, I mean, I agree with you. There are going to be data points that we're going to be looking for, but to me, this sort of shifts shifts us towards a form of brand marketing back to the days when, maybe you're not going to be able to count everything and know everything, right? Until the account comes through. So I thought that was really interesting. And then my third observation there, really, I mean, all of mine just build on yours, really, is that that at that point in time where somebody like comes into that little kind of, I like the way we've come out with this little spout thing now. We haven't. The report shares that an average 11-month buying journey from research to close, which I thought was also interesting, because that broadly, I think, falls in line. Was it? I guess a few years ago we might have talked about an 18-month close on a very large thing, and I know that they've got a broad section of products they looked at. So 11 months sounds about right. So if they're 70% into that journey, which is the other statistic we just talked about from when they made contact, that's 8 months they've been looking at you. And you've only got 3 months from sales contact to close, which is relatively short, right, for B2B. And then I was also, like I did just a minute ago, I was comparing stuff with other oft quoted things. Like, I know that, I should probably not mention Gartner in the presence of you and Kerry, but
that's fine.
But they say that, when B2B buyers are considering a purchase, they spend only 17% of that time meeting with potential suppliers. So if you think you've got that 11 months and that 8 months, then you've got only 3 months to close. They're going to spend very little time with you. You're sharing that time with another 3 vendors, presumably, right? It's a very short window. And so I thought that was that was really interesting in terms of where we tend to put a lot of our marketing investment in, which I was talking about a bit earlier, where we tend to really focus when we're having conversations about B2B marketing. And yet all of this stuff is happening elsewhere. And that's where we need to invest. So, and before we, I know that, like I said, this is a very good report. It's not new news, but and I thought when we were chatting before I pressed record, you said this was consistent with what you guys found at Forrester and Serious Decisions back then.
Because I think one of the things that we used to talk about a lot is the fact that there's so much time that the customer's doing research before they talk to a salesperson, which is kind of like in that last point is that kind of time span. But in reality, it's like they're spending a lot of time doing it before they would even try to get in contact with the marketing arm or anything that has to do with the vendor. So it's putting more pressure on what we would think of as, above the funnel. Yeah. And so it's and I know as we've been throwing around a lot of numbers about the buying cycle time and the sales cycle time. But I just remember it's like, so many companies that you and I work for. I mean, it's like when you'd ask, well, what's the sales cycle? They'd say, well, for a lot of our products, it's a 12-month sales cycle. Well, I'm wondering, does this refute the fact that there's a 12-month sales cycle? There's no way that, unless you're talking about, multi-million dollar, big, $10 million deals or something like that are really complex. But, for most products is the sales cycle has a lot of that 12 months moved off your books. It's there. It's just that, you've got you got a real short window from when they even possibly, go to your webinar or whatever to when it's done.
Oh, for sure. And I also think that if you're talking about B2B software, there's such a range, isn't there? There's stuff that you'd start off with on your credit card that then creeps into your organization through product-led growth and then becomes an enterprise solution that we end up spending thousands of dollars on and expected it. All the way through to, like you say, if you're buying an SAP that still exists, doesn't it? I guess as a massive SaaS solution, you're going to need to go through some process with. But what I was sort of reading into this is that I think that maybe we B2B marketers, well, there's a lot of that old perception floating about how much of that process you're in control of, because I think, and it makes a huge amount of sense today, there is so much content, so much information, so much research somebody can do, and they will invest the time to do that before they actually speak to the vendor. Whereas I think in days gone yore, that information maybe wasn't so available, and the vendor actually did a lot of the education earlier in the process directly, right? I guess. Yeah.
Or it was all about brand, who's the IBM, the vendor that you can't make a bad decision with, blah, blah, blah. So,
which still exists today, but nobody recognizes. I think that big brands like HubSpot, Adobe, I guess they still win a lot of business because they're a trusted brand, and it isn't a feature function war for those folks, is it? At all? Yeah. Okay. Well, we've got to wrap up. I've just, as usual, my oft quoted quote from this podcast is, "Oh my God, look at the time." So I think my conclusion from reading this research, although also one of the things is it's a wonderful content marketing asset because it's mainly just exposing its research. And I also think this is a great advocate for if you've got a marketing budget, push some into research, because I think everybody knows who Sixth Sense are, and I think it's because of a lot of this work they do. But anyway, so they don't really, it's not a story, like you said. It's not, here's a thing and here's a conclusion, and by the way, buy Sixth Sense. It's very much a very generous piece of research. But I think that my conclusion then is that modern B2B sales marketing, it's about that education phase, and that you need to, and that the buyer is getting very fixed on the requirements, very ready before they even contact you. So it's sort of playing in that big, it's brand building in the big sink. Yeah.
Playing in the sink.
Yeah. And and then unless you're the favorite, unless you're in the final four and maybe the preferred one in that final four, you will have very limited time to change that perception once they're out of the sink. So you've got to make it happen there. So what was yours?
Well, I sort of, I mean, I sort of broke my observation down into like, from a budget perspective.
Yeah.
It follows right on what you're saying, putting budget into brand and education, above funnel stuff is absolutely important. And whether you're doing that by campaigns and all kinds of other ways of looking at your budget, it's still I think that's where a big slice of the dollar, euro, pound goes. From a kind of a tech perspective, or maybe an operational perspective, I think getting into understanding buying signals and building buying teams, and certainly carrying a number of us were exposed to companies that were they would put opportunities in their CRM system that were basically their target accounts. And then anytime they got signals from any of those target accounts, it's like, okay, click, there's, I've given them a point and I'm establishing whether I know the individual's name or not. I'm trying to establish that there's a buying member out there. Yeah. And then I think from a staff time perspective outside the operations team is that helping sales be productive in these short sales cycles is really important. Absolutely. And one of the other things, not to go too far down on a tangent, is I remember one of the things that I did at Serious Decisions was working with vendors to build requirements lists for typical purchases, like marketing resource management or analytics or something like that. And then once you kind of build the list, you go back, you share that with clients. This is kind of what you should be looking at if you're purchasing, system like X, but you also share it with the vendors to say, hey, can you check how well you do on these things? And is that,
but you're category defining. Yeah, you're category defining at that point, which is what
and you're kind of sorting out, particularly when you get big categories like in analytics, it's like, well, there's analytics that do web, there's analytics that do the entire bundle. So that's where you start to see how where vendors play. But we were trying to help clients figure out how to make good decisions, and it turns out that we must have been doing a good job because they're doing all that work ahead of time.
Yeah, you wandered off on a bit of a tangent there, but I'm glad we looped it back to the good work that you were doing at Serious. I love it, man. And so I'll include a link to that report in the show notes, as well as a couple of things we've referred to there. And let's move on to the third agenda item. What song are we going for this week, Jeff?
Well, Bjork had a song in 1995 called "It's Oh So Quiet," and I think when you play this, you're probably going to go, because she starts out very quiet, like we don't really know what's going on, and then all of a sudden, bang! She's right in front of your face, and so whereas you've had zing, boom, hello. And so there's your client, right? Yeah. Hello, I'm here. Make me want to buy your stuff.
Exactly. Love it. All right, so I'll play out of It's So Quiet by Bjork from 1995. And will I see you in the studio next week, Nate?
Yes.
I'll see you then. Cheers, buddy.
So quiet. Shh, shh. It's oh so still. Shh, shh. You're all alone. Shh, shh. And so peaceful until you fall in love. Simple, the sky up above. Simple is caving in. Wow, wow. You never been so nuts about a guy you wanna love. You wanna cry, you cross your heart and hope to die till it's over. And then
Thank you, Jeff. And that was, of course, a little bit of the splendid Oh So Quiet from Bjork. And I'll include a link to that and the report from 6 Sense and the other stats we referred to there in the show notes on rockstarcmo.com. Right, it's that time of the week to wind down in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar and join Chief Troublemaker at the Content Advisory, Robert Rose, for a cocktail and a marketing thought. Good evening, Robert. What are you drinking?
Oh, hello, my friend, and welcome to the bar on what has seemed like a really long week. I don't know why, but it has seemed like a really long and busy week, which I guess is good in a way.
Well, you had your webinar this week, didn't you?
That we're feeling like we're kicking off 2024 and sort of being busy, which is
Nice.
which is good.
Yeah.
But we do it. We'd have a lovely cocktail, a little bit of I would say, a complex cocktail because I don't know. I'm feeling fancy.
Nice.
Yeah. So it is a tequila. This is a really interesting one. I think you're going to like it. It is a nice drink that is tequila and beer of all things, and it is a sort of a Mexican flavor here.
Wow.
And basically, this is called a lobatana. And basically the ingredients as we sort of make them are, so you take mezcal, and that's different than tequila. So if just for your knowledge, not that anybody wants to know this triviality around tequila, all tequilas are mezcals, but not all mezcals are tequila. So mezcal is a form of tequila, but it is typically smokier. It is typically a more, a older sort of drink than tequila, which has more of the sort of sweetness to it, if you will. So you take 2 parts mezcal, whichever you like, and then you have some orange juice, and then you put a little bit of lime, so maybe a half ounce of lime juice, just enough, not just a squeeze, but a good amount of lime juice. And so you take that mezcal, you take the lime juice, you take the orange juice, put that in there, and then you add a little bit of, and this is a little bit difficult to find, this is where it gets a little more complex, habanero bitters, which is basically just a spicy bitters. You can find it in most good liquor stores. And then here's the kicker, is that you take a Mexican lager. Like I prefer Modelo as my Mexican beer. I love Mexican beer; it's one of my favorites. So Modelo is my favorite of that. And then, but you could use a Tecate. You could use, if you really had to, you could use a Corona. But let's just garbage beer. But anyway. And so you basically combine all the ingredients except the beer. So the habanero, the orange juice, the lime, and of course the mezcal. Put all of that into a cocktail shaker. You fill it with ice. You shake it up, get it all good and shaked, and then basically add the beer, because obviously you don't want to shake the beer. So you add the beer to the shaker, and then you strain all of that into a Pilsner glass or a glass that you like, and then you have yourself a La Botana, which is basically tequila and beer and habanero bitters and lime and orange juice. It's a fantastic drink. I promise you'll really like it.
It sounds delicious. And we actually, you say that people aren't interested in the details of these cocktails, but I actually had some feedback on LinkedIn that you need to write this book.
Yes,
So
I have been. Yes, it's item number 763 on my to-do list. It's there. It's absolutely there. I do have designs on doing it at some point.
I look forward to it. Yeah, I'll have to give a shout. Actually, it's Nick Stein, who's the CMO at CI Hub Connector. CI Hub Connector,
okay.
I think. But anyway, he mentioned you, and he mentioned that the world needs this cocktail book. So anyway, we're enjoying these cocktails rather than you writing about them. Where are we going to this week, Robert?
Well, I think we have to go to Mexico for this.
Yes.
Mainly because of the temperatures outside and the raininess and sort of the general blahness of winter that the weather seems to be now. I think we should head to the Gulf side of Mexico, anywhere along the coast there, down near anywhere along there, along the Gulf would be just lovely. And because it'll be nice and warm, the water will be warm, and we can stick our toes in the sand and sit out on one of those little cabana tables and just sit and have these drinks until it makes us take a siesta. Yeah.
I like the way how this chap from Southern California is talking to a bloke from the UK and saying how miserable the weather is.
Yeah, well, I would tell you I wasn't going to spoil it because to keep the suspension of disbelief here, but it's actually beautiful here in Southern California this week. It's beautiful 72 degrees, sunny, and it's the reason you live in Southern California is January and February. So
absolutely. All right, mate. Well, we've got our toes in the water on the Mexican Gulf Coast, and our conversation turns to marketing. What are we talking about this week?
Well, we'll talk a little bit about owned media. It's a big. We identified it as one of the in our predictions last year, at the end of last year. It's a trend that we're seeing. It is it's undoubtedly a focus for many marketing organizations is to get good at an owned media management and a process in order to create whatever it's going to be, right? Whether it's your blog, resource center, thought leadership program, event strategy, whatever it is that owned media means for your particular business. And what we're discovering is that the muscle that is not there for many organizations is the skills around how to manage that. And it's interesting because it's sort of a reboot, if you will, of the owned media idea, because what so many businesses have in their head, so you'll remember this. You'll remember back in 2016, 2017, everybody had their sort of 2020 project. Remember the 2020 initiatives, that would have posters up all over the wall, hey, our 2020. And part of the 2020 initiative for all these businesses, so many of them, but one of them was get rid of all these owned media things, right? Microsites and landing pages and little rogue communities and rogue blogs and all these things that were out there. There was one client that we worked with back there that literally had hundreds of little microsites, because basically marketing teams, demand gen teams, brand teams, whatever the teams, they would want to do a campaign or a new product launch or something like that. And they would be like, it needs its own microsite. It needs its own thing, right? Yeah. It needs its own content hub. And so they would launch it. And the challenge is that they would run it like a campaign. They would run it, they would be up and then it would be done. The campaign would be done and it would sort of go fallow and basically the weeds would grow up around it. But then it was still there and nobody wanted to take it down because people are like, well, it helps with SEO, I guess, or somebody really liked it or there was politics involved. And basically the 2020 campaigns were all like, no, we're going to clean all this up. We're going to get down to one site. And the interesting thing is most businesses, maybe many businesses is a better way to say it, kind of over-indexed on that, right? They basically started saying, no, we're not launching anything new, right? Everything has to fit within the confines of the corporate website. And of course, that doesn't work either. So as owned media is becoming a thing again, and we're thinking about launching that digital magazine or that email newsletter, or even to some extent a webinar program or a podcast or something like that, where we want to create an owned media property, what we're finding is that these skill sets, the responsibilities, the charter needs a team or a person that isn't literally an editorial product manager and literally a product manager, because this is the person that's going to ensure that it's not run like a campaign. It's not run in a temporary way, but it's actually managed, promoted, and operated like one of the products and services of the business. Because our position is that if you're going to have anything in an owned media property, it should have all of the importance and strategic function of one of your products and services. Otherwise, you have to ask yourself why you have it. Yeah. Right? In other words, if the website or the blog or the resource center isn't as important as one of your products and services, then you really have to ask, well, why do we have it if it's not that important? So we're finding that these editorial product managers, where there is success, sort of come with 5 elements of skills, which is 1, editorial and journalism, right? And I don't mean necessarily the ability to write or create content, although these people can probably do that, but it refers rather to managing the quality of the content on that platform and being sort of what we call the arbiter of good, right? They acknowledge, know, and have the power to approve the product itself, the contents of the product itself. The second is sort of a product management or design thinking idea, which is core to any product manager, being able to sort of look at the audience's needs, the jobs to be done, if you like that framework, or design thinking, if you like that framework, and think about this thing as serving a product function to an audience or a customer, if you will. The third is elements of technology and data, because at the core of this is going to be first-party data and the ability to use metrics, data, et cetera, to affect a marketing result. The fourth is some level of business and or marketing acumen, right? So in other words, it needs to be promoted. It needs to have a paid campaign. It needs to have a PR strategy. It needs to have all of these kinds of things to help promote this as one of our products and services. So it needs that as well. And then the final one is to be able to lean into sort of the strategic, call it the politics, call it the relationship, call it the liaison with the rest of the organization. It needs to be able to stay tied to the rest of the business goals. And so it needs that level of strategy management as well. And so with those 5 sort of elements, it becomes a very specific role or charter for a team or a person to take on. And we're just seeing that every business that we're noticing that is successful with their owned media thought leadership or owned media properties has one or multiple of these people in charge of the actual product, not treating it like a campaign, not looking at it as a sort of adjunct to our product and service, but rather a product and service, and sort of servicing the business as such.
Yeah, I love this. It does sound a bit like a product manager in the traditional sense, doesn't it? With those skills in terms of writing and editorial, the project management element of this. They've got to understand the technology and be connected with the business. It's very like a product manager, isn't it? In a traditional marketing sense. I don't know why I'd call a product manager traditional marketing or product marketer traditional marketing, but it is kind of now. This is quite an interesting beast you've developed here.
It is. It shifts some of the. It both shifts some of the responsibility as well as aggregates elements of, because every one of those things, any one of those things was probably being done at some level by someone, right? It just sort of inherently has to work that way, right? If you have a corporate blog, there's probably a team or somebody that owns the corporate blog, right? And they, and to whatever degree, the owning of that blog, the definition of that is what is really usually missing. Like, when I go into a business and I talk to, the VP of marketing or the CMO, and I say, oh, tell me about your corporate blog. It's like, oh, well, that's owned by the PR and comms team. Okay, great. Yeah. What does that mean? What do they own? Well, that means they push all the buttons and they make content happen on the website. It's like, okay, do they get to say what goes up? Well, no, everybody sort of sends in their stuff to be published there, and they sort of make sure to schedule it and get it published. It's like, okay, well, that's not owning the product. That's actually just, they're in charge of making sure that the dam doesn't overflow, right? I mean, so it's having the strategic leading capability to be that arbiter of good, but to also manage the results of it. That, it's sort of having the responsibility and the power to make things happen that defines that product manager team or that product manager person over that owned media property. And I think I think businesses should have one for the website. I think you should have one for every email newsletter. I think they should have one for every blog, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And then you could, and are these organizations calling this role a product manager within marketing, or what are they? What's the title?
Some are actually, The example that I would use is ServiceNow, wonderful company, that a technology company and big-ish company, and they have their what they call Workflow, which is a content brand that they operate. It is both a digital magazine as well as an online website and a education platform. So they call it Workflow. Yeah. And the people who run it, there are 2, Richard Murphy and Sheila Dowd, and they operate like a media company, right? So Richard works as the editor and publisher on the content side, basically skills 1 and 3, I guess that would be. Yeah. And then Sheila tackles all the audience development and the paid and organic search and the promotions. And she's more like the skills 2 and 4. So they sort of split up those skills across the two of them, and they operate it like a little business.
Yeah. And like I think we've talked about before, they're like a little media company within the company, aren't they? Just
that's right.
Of them, it sounds perfect.
That's right.
Yeah, what a great example.
And the challenge is, of course, that last skill, which they would be the first ones to tell you is one of the biggest challenges, which is that liaison between the rest of, because the risk is when you do it like that it becomes a silo, right? That it becomes its own thing. And you've got to make sure to keep that liaison with the rest of the business so that you're staying relevant, right? Staying relevant to the overall purpose, which of course is marketing and sales or comms or brand or whatever the goals are of the product.
Yeah, you've also got to do that internal marketing, the marketing thing, haven't you? Otherwise, it sort of drifts away on an island, and then somebody will just cut it off eventually, won't they? If you get too isolated, if you go too far out on that little string, or whatever it is. That's really interesting. And where would people find a well-edited, product manager, technically up to speed thing that's really connected with the business, Robert? I tried.
Yes. That is a very long way of teeing up a promotional effort for me. Thank you very much. Content Marketing Institute is where you can find an article that I wrote on this particular topic. And so that would be interesting. And then, of course, you can find these kinds of articles on our own website, which is contentadvisory.net. Going under yet another redesign project for 2024, because that's the way we roll. We're pivoting all the time. So we're in the process of redesigning our site even as we speak.
Splendid. And that's your column is the rose-colored glasses column, right, on CMI, because that is correct.
Yes, thank you for knowing that. Yes.
Splendid. Yes. And when we spin the dial on the interwebs, where are we going to find you personally?
LinkedIn. I am all over LinkedIn. We are having a grand old time on LinkedIn, and really putting a lot of content out there. So would love to connect with everybody on LinkedIn. Just,
you're also big on YouTube now, aren't you? With the shorts, with this sub.
We're on the podcast for Joe and I. We are really focusing in on YouTube.
Yes.
It's no secret to everybody that, and this is probably worth a show in itself, that podcasting is in a bit of a challenge right now, especially with Apple changing the way that they measure downloads. Everybody in November and December of last year, and those chickens are coming to roost in January, where everybody's seeing their numbers go way down, which is good for the audience and actually good for metrics because it's more accurate. But boy, did it hurt. And so podcasting in the place that it is right now, we're really focusing in on becoming a YouTube show that is also a podcast.
Yeah. And the way the algorithm works is I basically get you and Joe every other video at the moment, so it's fantastic. All right, buddy.
Well, that's good. Our understanding is that it takes time for that to actually work. We've been creating shorts. We've been creating sort of smaller breakout sort of videos. So we create the shorts, which are 30 seconds to a minute. We create the sort of long shorts, if you will, which are 6 minutes of a topic, and then of course we have the whole show, and we put all that out. And it's a lot of production, I will tell you. And it seems to be starting to work, but our understanding is that it takes like 8 months for it to really kick in.
Wow. Well, I mean, I'm seeing you in my stream all of the time, so they obviously know, where my fandom lies. So that's fantastic. All right, mate.
Well, it would be just super helpful if you would just put that on loop and just play it all day, if you would. Just,
I think it'd be slightly creepy if I did that, mate. It's bad enough as it is. So but most importantly to me, I mean, it's lovely you're on the digitals and all that stuff and you're on my loop, but will you be in the bar next week?
Of course I will.
I'll see you next week, mate. Thank you, Robert. With all the changes to the social media algorithms, the challenges with rented land, third-party cookies, and all of that stuff, owned media is definitely where it's at right now. Some great advice there. So that's a wrap on episode 202 of the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. I've been your host, Ian Truscott. Thanks to Jeff and Robert for sharing their insights. And you can find links to us, our work, and all the things we discussed in the show notes on rockstarcmo.com, along with our blog, newsletter, and all of our previous episodes. And thank you for dropping a dime into your podcasting jukebox, selecting our track, and jiving along with us. I would love to hear from you. So please say hello or drop us a rating or review in your favourite podcast app, or just keep listening. I'm glad you're here. Next week, Jeff and I will be diving into the relatively new discipline of revenue operations, and Robert will be surprising me in the virtual bar with a fresh marketing thought. Until then, have a great week, and I hope you again join us here next week on Rockstar CMO FM.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.